Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller, from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate. Joe Mueller.
Welcome back to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. This is episode number 42 with Chad York. Hey, Chad, how you doing today?
Great, Joe. How you doing?
Good, man. How was your Easter?
Oh, my Easter was fantastic. Had some family time, got out and did a little golfing.
Awesome.
I did okay. And then had a great Easter with my wife.
Awesome. So, yeah, just getting started into this podcast, I wanted to have you on here because for the last couple episodes and maybe a couple more, I wanted to focus on, I'm not going to say newbie, but kind of like newer type investors. And I know you've been in the business for a couple of years, and I just kind of want to hear more about what got you started and what even created the interest in getting into real estate investing. And then let's talk about some of the projects you've been working on and what you have plans for the future. So,
okay.
If that works for you, how did this whole real estate thing get into your brain that it sounded like a good idea?
Well, I got into the work side of it when I was younger. My father always had projects come up pretty much like I'd come home from school on like a Friday and I'd see a big mound of rocks and he's like, hey, that's what we're doing this weekend, and turned into a landscaping weekend. Or I'd come home and he'd have a bunch of materials and he's like, oh, hey, we're going to redo the bathroom this weekend. I'm like, okay. So it just kind of turned into a normal thing. And he actually drew up plans to build an addition on our house, like a 2-car garage, a shop, a living room, and a bathroom. And he did it all himself. So, I mean, we did a major project when I was growing up, and that kind of got me familiar with everything. So fast forward, probably to about 5-6 years ago, I was going through paramedic school and firefighter training and all that. And I reached out to a guy and I was like, hey, if you know anyone looking for work on the construction side, just, let me know. I'm looking to make a little extra cash. So I started working with this guy out of Elgin, and he was flipping houses. So okay. I would just show up, and over one winter, we fully gutted a house in Carpentersville and did just about everything. So I'd show up and he's like, hey, this is what we're doing today. He'd give me about 5 minutes of instructions, and we'd get to it. So I meet my wife.
Is this like your first mentor type person, or how did that relationship? So step back a second. You were or are a firefighter paramedic?
I was.
Okay.
I got out of it about a year ago to jump into investing full time.
Okay.
And I also have a part ownership in a telecommunications company. We sell business phone service through the internet. So
okay.
we just started that up too.
Cool.
But you can say he was a bit of a mentor. This guy he still is a full-time firefighter in Elgin. And he's been doing this for about 20 years, just word of mouth advertising. He would redo people's bathrooms and houses or whatever needed to be done. So he kind of jumped project to project. So I worked with him for probably 2 or 3 years, putting myself through school and everything. And I met my wife around that time, and she was an entrepreneur. So I started to learn about being an entrepreneur and everything like that. And she asked me a question one day that was, what would you do if money wasn't an issue? And to be honest, I was like, I've never had to think like that. Money's always been an issue. You got to work, you got to pay bills and everything else. So it took me about 2 months thinking about it. And, I was talking to my boss and everything. And I was like, man, I'd like to do what you're doing, maybe be a contractor and everything else. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you don't want to be me. He goes, you want to be the guy writing me checks. He goes, that way you don't have to do this and break your back the rest of your life. So if you want to do the work, you can get in here and do it. But if you don't, you can just write a check and have someone else do it. And right. I was like, that's solid advice.
Yeah, that's funny because that sounds sounds just like something my dad would say to me as well when I was younger. It was like, go to college, get a degree, and be the guy that is in charge of all the other people doing all the work, so you don't have to bust your butt for the rest of your life like I did. And I'm like, yes, you're right, Dad. And he was right, absolutely. Minus my failure to the college degree part. But anyway, go on. Sorry.
Well, I mean, real estate in itself is a different kind of education that there's not really a degree for, if you ask me.
Sure.
So, but, so he told me that, and then I heard some of those, I was driving and I heard, oh, you want to flip houses? Come to this free, 2-hour seminar in Schaumburg. So I went to that by myself and signed up for their 3-day. And, I had 2 tickets. So I was going to call my buddy, and then I called my dad and told him about it. And he goes, I'm interested in that. I'm like, okay, well, let's go. And I told him, I was like, because I've been into a bunch of different ventures through my life. And I was like, Dad, listen, I'm really serious about this. I really want to get into it. So, don't come with me and kind of put it down. Just stay open-minded. And he was like, all right, I'm into that too. So we went to this 3-day thing, and it kind of opened our eyes to the whole picture of it, the networking, the financing, all the other bells and whistles of it, and we jumped in.
Was it Andrew Holmes 3-day?
Oh, the Fortune Builders.
Oh, Fortune Builders. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, Fortune Builders. I didn't know if you want me to.
No, man, it's cool. Whatever. It's an open forum here. We can talk. No worries, man. I don't care.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so it was Fortune Builders, and I really connected with that community. With Dan Merrill and JD Asasian and them, and it just sat with me ethically, morally, and everything like that. So
right.
It took me so we got into it, and my father lives in northern Indiana, so we're about 100 miles apart. So for us to kind of collaborate and work together, it was kind of difficult. Mm-hmm. So I kind of did my own thing out here, and it took me about a year of getting into the information and education and knowledge and going to networking groups. And I remember I met Dan Clarton because I was on my way to the firehouse, and I pulled out in front of a car or behind a car that had "I buy houses fast," one of his signs at about 5 in the morning.
Yep, that sounds about right.
And about 6 in the morning, and I took that number down. I called him that day, and he's like, "Yeah, we do a little, investor accountability group. Why don't you come out?" And it was at Portillo's,
sure,
out in Crystal Lake, and I was kind of with him since the beginning of his thing, and we partnered together on my first wholesale deal. So networking is key, I should say.
How'd that wholesale? Tell me about the wholesale deal.
So I was doing direct marketing, and I focused on absentee homeowners and high equity. Mm-hmm. And I actually reached a guy in Kentucky. So he was an older gentleman, called me up, and he had a tenant in previously that was supposed to take care of the place and fix it up, and that fell through. So he was looking at the options to sell it to an investor before he put money back in it and tried to rent it. So I crunched some numbers over the phone. He told me his price, and upon a $30,000 rehab, I could probably meet him around his price. So that's where my numbers got me, but I told him it was going to be dependent on looking at the property and doing my numbers. So he drove up to visit his son near a holiday. I think it was Thanksgiving. And on his way to Wisconsin, he kind of stopped in, and I met him at his property. So we did a walkthrough. I crunched some numbers in my vehicle. I had everything ready but the repair numbers, so it was easy to just kind of plug them in and get to an offer. Mm-hmm. So my repairs came out to about $50,000. So I had to drop where he wanted to be about 20. But that was my safe zone, and I wasn't going to BS this guy. I was just like, listen, this is the best I can do from what needs to be done. And he had some objections, and then we walked through kind of the repairs I was thinking about. And then he accepted my offer.
So how did you come up with that repair number? just before we get into the offer acceptance and the rest of the deal. I mean, is that from your experience working with this other local contractor that you were kind of doing rehabs with, or I mean, how do you, or maybe for the audience's benefit, how do you determine? You look at a property. I mean, what helps you determine some numbers, especially if you're like shooting at the hip, which sounds like you're in your car. You don't have a lot of time to put it together. I mean, what'd you do?
Right. So I have a repair estimator, and it kind of breaks down the cost per square foot of like a job. So, if the property is 1,300 square foot, it's X amount for a roof. It's X amount for painting. And then you just kind of do the math. So I got a spreadsheet, and it was from Fortune Builders, but you got to tweak it to your area. So, I mean, you can get, if you want to build your own and kind of go off it, you can go to Home Depot or a big box store, and you can get a quote for certain projects. They have all that information there. So they tell you, well, it's this much per square foot. So saying if you want to build your own repair estimator, you can kind of go to Home Depot or a big box store, and you can kind of do quotes. Like they have set prices for installations and everything like that. And then you can make your own template, and you can get your numbers that way. So there's many ways. So that's, I had my own formula. I just had to plug in the numbers. So I brought my computer, and it was, like I said, a spreadsheet. So I just plugged in the repair numbers, which turned out to be about 50,000.
Okay.
And because this place had, I mean, it needed cosmetics and everything else. So normally, if it's just kind of regular updates and painting and stuff, it should be around 30. But this place had floor issues. Like the living room was sunk on one side, and then a bedroom was kind of sunk in also. So I knew someone was going to have to rip up the subfloor and then do some structural work or supports or something. So that's where the extra 20 grand came in, just for a safety net.
Sure.
So
where was this property again? Where was it?
This was in McHenry.
Okay.
This was in McHenry.
Cool.
I think it was near McCollum Lake. Area. So this guy accepted my offer, and we kind of bargained for half of the taxes he owed. And I was like, okay, well, that's a couple grand. No big deal. I can do that. So this was my first deal, and I kind of printed off a contract. It was a one-page general contract. And at the end, I saw it referenced North Carolina or something, so I forgot to tweak that out.
Sure.
So to not sound unprofessional in front of him, I said, you know what, let me go back and just double check a couple things with the taxes and that, and then I can meet you in the morning, because he was about to drive up to his son, and we can sign that. He was like, okay. So I went to my attorney, because it's my first deal. I'm like,
sure,
okay, this is a contract, and he made an offer, and this thing's going through. Right. So I sat down and I just fired off questions at him, and I come to find out that Illinois pays their taxes in the rear.
Right.
So you can add a year's worth of taxes to my price, which was about $5 grand. So what I found out was that my offer on this house was $40,000.
Okay.
Or $45,000. He had another offer from another investor for $40,000. And then I found out about the taxes, which put me right at that other investor.
Sure.
So I stayed up all night, and I was just thinking about options of how I can structure this, to still make it look enticing to him over the other investor. So I met him in the morning, and my game plan was to be upfront and honest, because that's just kind of how I work. I'll tell you everything straight out. If you don't like it, great, we could both move on. If you're still interested, let's keep talking about it and see if we can help each other.
Sure, I love it.
So we met at Starbucks, and he already gave me the keys to his place. So I had the keys, and then I brought a $100 bill, because I knew he was leaving. I wanted to put something down, because that's what I was trying to do, $10, $100, whatever you want to do. Most of the time it should be a couple hundred, but that kind of makes it official with your contract.
Correct.
So I sat down with him, and I said, I got good news and bad news. And I put the $100 bill on the table, and I said, the good news is and I slid the $100 bill in front of him. I said, I still want to buy your property, and I brought the $100. So when we do this, you can kind of have this for the road, and then we can get started. The bad news, and then I put his keys on the table, and I said, you owe a year's worth of back taxes. So he was like, well, what do you mean? And then I kind of had to explain it to him. And I positioned this as, you had a tenant in there. Technically, he's responsible for the taxes. I don't know if he paid the taxes or not. So I don't know if he paid the taxes before he left or if you still have to pay him. So I kind of played dumb. I figured he probably didn't, but this was kind of the approach I could take.
Sure.
So I pitched that to him, and I was like, so worst case scenario is I can still buy the property, and we'll say I'll buy it at 47 because I was going to pay half of his taxes, which was $2,500, but it turned out to be a year. So I kind of worked in a $5,000 buffer, which took the deal to about $42,500. So it was still juicier than the $40,000.
Right.
So I left it on the table as, hey, we can do this. We'll have to look into and see if the taxes are due. Worst case scenario, you'll walk away with about $42,000.
Right. I get it.
Yeah. So we signed it. He took the money and he left. And then I was working with the title company, and come to find out that, you know, taxes were still owed. There was a lot of hand-holding with this guy, and rightly so. He was an older gentleman from Kentucky living on a farm who just sold a property to some young kid who made him an offer and gave him $100, you know. So obviously he's sitting at home and he's like, what's going on up there? Is this really going to happen type deal? So I talked to the title company, I talked to my attorney, and it came to find out that we could do this deal and he didn't have to leave his home. So we packaged it all up, all the documents, we sent it down to him, and then he was able to sign everything and just have it notarized and send it back for the deal. But let me backtrack a second for how I found a buyer.
Okay.
That's where Dan Clarkton comes in. So I was a new investor, you know, just in it for under a year, and my buyer's list was very small.
Sure.
I shot it out to my buyer's list. I kind of put it on Craigslist and just kind of like trying to promote this. I brought the deal to the RIA meeting when they used to have it in Crystal Lake at the Holiday Inn.
Sure.
And there was a lot of interest, but I don't think anyone came out to actually see the property.
Right.
So they were kind of scared off of it, maybe because it was near the lake, kind of in a dead-end subdivision. Maybe they were afraid of flooding because around that time we had the big flood a couple of years earlier or recently where a lot of homes were underwater. So
okay.
They weren't really interested. And 2 weeks into the deal, I was supposed to close in 30 days. So half the time in, I had no buyer.
Right.
So I'm kind of, what do I do? And then I reached out to Dan, and I was like, hey, I got this property. Let's partner on it, you know, and let's just move it. So at this point, I didn't care if I made a little less off the deal as long as I got the deal done to kind of stand up to my word and just to make a little money. So a little money is better than no money.
Smart man, yeah.
Right. So Dan fired it off, and he was like, well, what do you want me to do? I'm like, find me a buyer, I'll take care of the rest. So he fired it out. He got an interested party and sent them out to the house, and there was only one person that was interested, and they showed up, walked the property. They loved the property right there. It was a three or four bedroom, 2-bath. It had an in-law suite, and we were wholesaling it for about $57,000.
Okay.
So in McCollum Lake, I think a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath with the in-law suite. And the property right behind it had half the land, half the square footage, and it was selling for $60,000.
Nice.
So it kind of made our deal look very enticing.
Sure.
So a couple showings with this guy, and then he signed it and he bought it, and we moved on from there. So
So just to maybe explain to the listener that may not be 100% familiar with the way wholesaling works, your initial intent was to get this property under contract. You see what you did. You see, you got a large number of repairs on the property itself. You were thinking, was it initially was your initial thought that you wanted to wholesale it, or was the initial thought maybe to rehab it and flip it?
I evaluate everything as a rehab.
Okay.
But this one, I knew I wanted to wholesale it just to kind of turn over some money and throw it back into my marketing.
Right. No, great idea. So what you did is you got the property under contract and you essentially marketed the contract as you sold the contract essentially with that sounds like a $10,000 difference between what your acquisition price was versus your sale price of the contract to the new buyer at 47 versus 57. I get the tax proration
Correct.
in between, so there's a little bit of muddiness in between there. But is that pretty much what you guys ended up making in the end? Was like roughly $10,000 on a wholesale contract flip?
Yeah, it was actually came out to a little less, but right around there.
Cool. Oh, that's great. And you met Dan
I
Clarton?
mean, that's how it was positioned, and yeah, me and Dan Clarton. And let's see, we flipped it, turned it around very fast. I don't remember where I was going to go with that. So
that's all right. So how old were you at this time? How old are you now, and how old were you back then?
Oh well, I'll be 35 in June, and
okay.
I was about 32.
All
So
right.
about 3 years ago.
Cool. Oh, that's awesome. So you got started pretty young. I love it.
I guess you could say that. I mean, I feel kind of middle of the road, but
well, I mean,
from a lot of people in the game, yeah, I'm pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, look at the people that show up at networking meetings or the people that you're seeing, more commonly throughout your adventures in real estate investing, and to find, there's always there's a handful of guys in their early 30s, but for the most part, I'd say the bulk of the investors around us, whether they have any deals done or not, are 40, 50 plus years old. I'm just throwing that out there. So I think that's great that you had the wherewithal to get started at a younger age. And at a point in your life where you can transition it, like you said, you had a career path, you kind of changed gears because you found a better opportunity in real estate investing. It's that's something that I think is pretty cool. So let's move on to the next opportunity. I want to hear more.
Okay. So the next opportunity came about 9 months later. I cast a wide net early on. Mm-hmm. So I got all this training, I got all this information, and I was kind of overloaded and just fired off a lot of different marketing, so direct mail, bandit signs, probates, absentee homeowners, and I was going to networking groups, so I was spreading myself pretty thin, and I didn't really have a good focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what took me so long to find the next deal, and I was really looking into financing. So financing was one of my biggest hurdles, because right off the bat, I was like, well, I could find some deals, but financing was kind of tough. So
right.
I told everyone who I was, what I was doing. I kind of was just, hey, this is me. I'm doing real estate investing, and my second deal, which was a rehab in Huntley, came from word of mouth. So somebody knew who I was and what I did. They had a situation where their parents were going through some medical stuff, and they had some medical bills accruing, and they had a house that someone was kind of living in, but it wasn't really turning a rent profit. It was like a friend of the family. Mm-hmm. And they contacted me. They were like, hey, we got this property here. We kind of want to know our options. Here's what's going on. So I came out to this property. I walked it. It was pretty much a full gut. And it was a custom-built home by someone in their family, like their great-grandpa built it or something. So everything was custom. And my numbers came out to about $55,000 that I could purchase this property for. Our repair numbers were about $60,000 to put back into this house, and then they actually had someone who was interested in moving into it when it was fixed up.
Interesting.
Excuse me. So, I mean, that was kind of a home run right there. I was just like, okay, well, we got to get the end buyer happy and the seller happy. So the end buyer had to sell their home to buy this home. So we got that. I sent them to my mortgage guy. They got pre-approved for the high end of what I appraised the house at, so the ARV. And then I went through the numbers with them, and this was all before I got it under contract. So I went through the numbers with them and kind of gave them a projected timeline and said, I could probably sell this house to you for about $160,000.
Okay.
I'm putting it at 170. So if I can save them $10,000 in the purchase price, would that work? So they went to the mortgage guy. They got pre-approved for like 170, 180, so the higher end. And then as it went along, if the budget made sense, then I told them I would sell it to them for a lower cost.
Okay. Okay. Kind of interesting situation where you actually have an end buyer lined up before you've even started the project. Was there something about this property that was, specifically appealing to the general public? Like, we're like, oh man, I got to have that house. It's sitting on, a large lot or location base. And what was so appealing that these people really wanted it before you even fixed it?
Well, it was mostly family. So they were moving closer to family. Okay. So that was kind of the driving force.
Right. Okay.
And it's in Huntley, and Huntley has very good school districts.
Sure.
And they had children, and they wanted to keep them in the same schools and all that.
Yeah, sure. No, that totally makes sense. Again, like I said, it's just kind of unique where you got, you kind of were the middleman, it sounds like, in orchestrating this together, but you had both, you had the seller and the buyer lined up, already knew each other. So you acquired the property then, and did you act more like a general contractor on that one, or was it actually like you closed on the deal, fixed it up, and then resold it? I mean, how did that side of it work?
So this one was a bit unique. So we acquired the property, and I was very close with the buyers, and we did this. I said, listen, here's the budget. We can do the whole house and the outside and the yard and everything else, or we could put a little more into the house and not touch the outside. So a unique situation because you're getting some input and you're kind of customizing it to their, what they want. So it's kind of a win-win.
Sure.
So they chose the route of doing more to the inside, and then they'll take care of the outside.
Okay.
So we started the rehab. I was involved from beginning to end. I did the majority of the rehab myself. My father came out and helped. I had some friends help and stuff like that, but it was mostly me demoing this house to some rock and roll and getting some aggression out.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Put on your good music and just destroy some stuff. So demo day's a good day. Yep, sure.
Any hiccups? I mean, was there anything that came up on this project that was unexpected? Is that a funny question? It must be.
It's a funny question, but everything in this house was well built.
Okay.
Like I said, it was custom built, and whoever built it did it right, did it very well. The cabinets were built into the wall, so you weren't just popping a cabinet off. You were taking each piece of wood with 5 or 6 screws or nails out. And everything in this house, what you would think removing a floor or replacing a floor or, doing some drywall, doing some electric, doing some plumbing, everything took longer than expected because it was built so well.
Sure.
So with this property, it had a boiler system and an AC, and the AC was kind of in the attic, looked like a spider vent in the attic. And so we ripped out the whole boiler system. We redid some plumbing. Actually, the drain in the basement for the plumbing, my father went to grab it and it's like, oh, look at this. It just fell off. He just pulled it right off the wall because it was so corroded.
That's awesome.
And that gave us some realization okay, we need to look a little harder at this place if that just came off the wall.
Sure.
So we redid all the majority of the plumbing. With the electrical, it was custom. I had 2 electricians in there, And I was like, hey, give us a quote, do a walkthrough, take a look. And literally this is what happened. They were like, okay, well, let's follow some lines. This goes, what is that? What is it? What's going on here? Baffled, because out of each connector box, there was like 5 lines coming out. So things crisscrossed the house. There was no direct lines to any outlets. So that was another issue that came up. So
was it two electricians working concurrently, or like you tried one and he was like, yeah, man, I can't figure this out. So then you hired another one.
Well, I got a quote from one, and then, we were kind of just thinking it over. So we took his quote, put it on the shelf. I knew another electrician. He kind of came out and he took a look at it, and it was kind of the same feeling. So
how did you?
What ended up happening?
If you don't mind me interrupting, I just had this question actually this morning from one of our listeners, and I know I got to do another one of those question and answer podcast sessions. They actually were asking, which is something I covered in the past, but being a newer investor, I mean, how do you find these electricians or these contractors? What's some advice you give the listener on how to really find the best type of contractor to work with and choose their what's your process that you've used? I mean, obviously this was a big project. You're gutting out a single family home. It's like your first real rehab on your own. What's the advice you could hand out?
If you don't know anyone or get a recommendation, you just got to shop around.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can Google, you can go to investor meetups and in your area or around the area and say, hey, do you guys recommend anyone or know anyone? You can kind of go that route.
Sure. No, that's what I always say. Yeah. Great advice.
Yeah. And I mean, on that job, I got referred to a Windows guy, the granite countertop company, a drywall guy, and some electricians.
Okay.
So I was kind of just talking with people, and hey, I know this guy, or someone used this guy before on their personal residence, and I was like, oh, well, give me his number. I'd call him and kind of came out, got a quote. Is it in the budget? Okay, that works. Let's do it.
Okay.
So.
Cool. No, fair enough. I love it.
Yeah. So what ended up happening with the electrical is I was like, you know what? I don't want to mess around with this. Let's just run all new electrical. Instead of trying to figure it out, trying to, track down lines, I was like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to install all new electric next to existing electric and keep the old in. So we have power, you can use all your tools, and then run it all to the box. And then one day we'll just switch out the box, unplug everything, plug everything in. So that's what ended up happening, and it went well. I don't think we had any hiccups, and the transition day went smooth. And
great. How old was the property?
Electric.
How old was the house?
I think it was built in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
60s.
So enough where you had enough work to be done.
Oh yeah, it had plaster walls.
Sure.
So it was like twice as thick as regular drywall, and busting through that was quite the job.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it's not like on TV.
No, it's definitely. On TV, you're getting the highlights. So
right, exactly.
You take a 6 months project and maybe a couple minutes out of each day where you're feeling good. Like, hey, clear the house. And,
right.
Piece that together and make a show.
Right, making phone calls from the beach. Yep, totally. All right, so you get this big project going. I know at that point, I think is when we actually met in person, because I believe you were talking about working on this project. Well, the first time I was introduced to you. What was the wrap up for me how it all worked out in the end?
So we bought it and had to work with the buyer, the end buyer, because they were selling their house. Mm-hmm. So I put them in touch with realtors and everything else. So they were working on their side, I was working on my side, and we were trying to coordinate this move so that they have a place to move into when the house sells and they're not making 2 mortgage payments and everything else.
Sure.
So I bought this place in July and sold it in November.
Well, that's not bad.
So 4 months full gut. And I mean, I spent a lot of time there, 12, 14-hour days sometimes, just to get stuff done.
Sure.
I did hire a contractor, and we kind of butted heads. So he made it maybe a couple weeks to a month or two, and then we had to part ways. So I ended up taking on the rest. I didn't want to try and find another contractor to catch him up to speed and do that, since I was familiar with the work and I can do it. So I just did it on my own to kind of move things along.
You remind me a lot. You remind me a lot of my younger self, Chad. I got to be honest. Now that I'm hearing your story, I've been through that experience myself, where I was instead of even monkeying around with getting another guy out there and waiting for the bid and walking, getting 3 new contractors to walk through and get 3 bids. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to try to do this myself. That's awesome. Yeah. And spending 18 hours at a property, sweating from 5 a.m. to freaking 10 p.m. or whatever, and getting 4 hours of sleep in between and barely eating. Yep. That's how you got to do it, man. You got to hustle. I love it.
Right.
Go on.
We hustled. So
You did 4-month turnarounds. Great.
Yeah. One of my best friends actually jumped on board and helped me out. So he was there just about as much as me. But he had a full-time job, so he got to take a break when he went to work.
Right.
So, I mean, there were days we were there till 2 in the morning, starting at like 7 or 8 in the morning and just powering through it. And after a job like that, it took probably a month or 2 of just winding down to get back to normal from grinding and everything else. So,
sure.
So the wrap up on it, we were projected to sell in October. That's kind of when the closing date was on the other property. That got pushed back a month, so that turned into November, and it almost got pushed back to December. So I was kind of sitting on this property. I had a private money investor, so I was paying on the money, and regular monthly bills, and I was just like, okay, well, I mean, I can't have these people move in and pay 2 mortgages, so I was kind of waiting on them. I did project 6 months. I knew it would be done before that, and it was a struggle for a couple weeks there just to get sellers aligned, attorneys aligned, and stuff like that.
Sure.
So it turns out they sold the place in early November, and then about less than a week after they sold it, they signed and bought this property. Okay. And since I was working with them, I let them transition into the house. So they actually moved some stuff over to the property before they bought it.
Okay.
So instead of getting a storage locker, they just put stuff in the garage and in the house. So that's why it's a bit of a unique situation.
It happens though sometimes. I mean, I've been in that same situation. I mean, even on the MLS brokering side, there's plenty of times we have buyers that are in between houses, or they're living, with parents or friends or family or whatever, hotel rooms, and they need to get their stuff out of there in order to, at least complete the transition, start it, whatever, and you negotiate some of that stuff out. So I think what you did was, it's maybe a little abnormal, but I mean, it's not unheard of. And you got to get the deal done, man. You had your buyer lined up, so if you had to appease them a little bit more by letting them move in a little bit, then I see no problem with that. Have an attorney involved, but yeah. Just in case. Yeah,
attorneys were on both sides, and everyone felt comfortable and safe with what was going on, so everything was moving forward.
Cool. So at this point, you're a couple of years into your real estate investing career. You've got a couple deals under your belt. What are you working on right now?
So right now, I'm working on a property in Northbrook, and I picked it up last month in March.
Okay.
And we're looking to get it listed in about a week and a half.
Okay.
And it turned out from going to cosmetics where we refinished the cabinets. I wasn't planning on that, but for the little extra money, we feel like we can get a better value out of it.
Sure.
And then we kind of upgraded there's 3 bathrooms, or 2.5. And we ended up changing everything out in there too. So the costs were a little more than projected, but it is within the budget we projected. I'm partnering on this. And then we're going to list it for probably about $30,000 more than I originally projected to list it to.
Oh.
Just because the market's been going up and comparable items that just sold or houses that just sold in the area and their finishes suggest that we can likely get more from our property.
That's awesome. So what's the numbers on this one?
Yeah. So I found this buyer by doing a Craigslist ad. I just put a post out there like, hey, I buy houses, kind of like an extended bandit sign.
Sure.
Right? So I just went on the forum. You can create your own posts. I was getting into cheap marketing because my marketing budget dwindled down, and found a buyer. They saw me and they called me up, asked me to come out, and this was in October of last year.
You mean seller, right? You
So they asked me to come out.
You said buyer a couple times, but you meant you found the seller through Craigslist.
Oh, seller, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
So I was marketing to sellers.
Right, on Craigslist.
And I was a buyer.
Right.
Right,
Right.
on Craigslist. So they reached out to me and they called me up. I gave them my elevator pitch over the phone. Hey, I'm an investor. This is what I do. And tell me a little bit about yourself. So they were a family that wanted to move to Canada. They were moving, for a family land with a family job. So, they're just looking to sell their house, and they did their research. So they knew what investors had to offer, but they were shopping around. So they had me come out and do a walkthrough, and I explained, hey, I can come out and see your property. I can evaluate it, and within a day, I can get back to you with a number. So scheduled a time for me to come out. They had realtors and everything coming through, so they were doing their due diligence and getting ideas of what they can sell it for in the process. So I went out there, spent about 20 minutes. It wasn't even long. I walked in, said hi. I was like, okay, well, let me walk your property. Like, you can walk me through if you want. And they said, no, just, look wherever you want. And I said, okay, it should be short time. So I just go through and, need a new kitchen or counters or floors need to be redone. Calculated my numbers, thanked them for their time, talked a little more, and then I was on my way. So I called them the next day, and I told them my offer. And they said, okay, well, we're still getting other bids and talking with other realtors. We'll get back to you. And I said, all right, great. So 2 weeks, or probably within the week, they called me back and they were like, well, we want to go with your offer. I said, fantastic. Let's schedule a time and I'll come out and meet you and talk a little more.
Sure.
So went out, got the contract signed, told them about the process. They said they want to move in November. And I was like, great, well, I can close on your timeline and help you get out of here. So they did a little more research and found out that when you're moving to Canada, that you need to pay on your income for that year. So it was near the end of the year, so they would have had to pay a big ticket. So they called me up and they said, hey, is it possible to move maybe in March? And as an investor, you got someone who wants to sell their house, whether they want to sell it to you next month or in 6 months, the answer is yes.
Right.
Absolutely. You want to sell me your house in a couple months? Great.
Right.
So
they
wanted to sign a contract.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah,
I just have I have one or two, I guess, a little bit of off the wall questions. Do you think there's a psychological impact when you're dealing with a seller based on like your presentation physically, like the way you look, the way you dress, the car you drive? And I'm asking that because I think we have a lot of listeners that are newer to the business, a lot of listeners that are interested in wholesaling and rehabbing, doing exactly what you're doing, which is why I wanted you on here.
Okay.
Do you think any of that stuff matters personally? Do you wear a suit and a tie and pull up in a fancy car, or is it better to kind of be yourself in a t-shirt and jeans? What's your thought on that? And I'm just curious. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer.
Okay. Well, a bit of a background. I've been in sales my whole life. So in between, fire department, I was in the military and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
I did sales to bridge gaps. I guess you could say, like, I managed an AT&T store for a while. I traveled the country selling stuff, like infomercial-wise. Like I was, out there pitching and doing that. So I'm very comfortable kind of talking with people.
Sure.
So talking with people and building rapport is a big deal, because I feel like every deal that I got, and because when you go through a deal, you run into objections and hardships and stuff, and if you can talk through that and make your seller or buyer, if you answer their questions and make them feel comfortable and they understand everything, they're more willing to move forward with you.
Sure.
So I'm very transparent. I try and be professional. I think it's working.
Okay.
Fancy vehicle. I mean, I kind of got a Jeep Patriot, so if that's fancy, then, it's the only one I got. So whatever car you have, I don't think it matters, unless it's a hoopty, and then you don't really want to.
Well, yeah, that's why I asked the question, because if you pull up in some beater, with ripped jeans, right, and a Motley Crue T-shirt, is that going to make a different impact as opposed to somebody who's in slacks and a collared shirt and a tie that pulls up in a Cadillac? And I've had some conversations with Dan about this, and he's he kind of has a similar answer. It's about building the rapport, but there's got to be some type of psychological backside to it too. And with your background in sales, maybe you can elaborate on it. When they're staring at you through the living room window and they see that, let's just say a nicer vehicle pull up and a guy in a suit get out, does that give them the impression, oh yeah, this guy must have, deep pockets? And does that kind of set you back? Or is it maybe better to show up, like you said, in a Jeep Patriot and wearing your regular day-to-day clothes, right, as a regular guy? Like, well, I don't have the resources to do 10 of these houses. I've got the resources to have 1 or 2. So, I need to get it at the right price in order to do that.
Well, and I think it's where you are and what you're working with, but absolutely look good, like dress well. I don't show up in a suit and tie. I guess my style is more, hey, I'm just a regular guy, I'm local, I'm doing this, my wife's my partner, we're just kind of flipping house and stuff. But I wear something nice, like nice jeans, and when it's cold out, like a nice sweatshirt or sweater, or, sometimes a button-up shirt, but sure, it's not, I'd say it's like business casual, I guess you can say. But just to kind of set a level of professionalism.
Sure. Okay.
So
fair enough.
Know what you're talking about, right? Do your homework, know your numbers, and dress nice. Don't show up in, the clothes you would demo a house in, or sure, something a little nicer.
Right.
And I mean, every time I would go visit them, I would look the same, a nice shirt, nice jeans. So kind of like average run of the mill.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Right. Yeah. So, and another thing, what I've been telling newer investors is know your numbers. If you know your numbers, then it makes talking and negotiating easier, because you know what you can't afford, right? You know where your risk lies. Like if I pay $10,000 more than this, I might make $10,000 instead of 20. Like then you're taking a risk of flipping a house. That's kind of doesn't make sense depending on where you are.
Sure.
But if your number's comfortable, because things happen, I think in every project there's something happened where, you didn't really account for it, but it needs to be done. So. Right.
Little buffer zone.
Right.
And where do you, we talked about the rehab costs and stuff, and I think that was some great advice about possibly even utilizing Home Depot and their flat rate numbers and stuff. What about valuation of these properties? Are you working with brokers in order to get a good idea of what these properties are worth? Are you using Zillow? How does it work on your end to get a good idea what these properties are actually going to be valued at when you're done repairing them?
Well, in my 3 years, I don't really have a realtor I work with, because when it comes to realtors and investors, they're not really comfortable with making low offers.
Sure.
Maybe they feel bad, and I get it. Like there's a house listed for $150,000. I can only offer like $60,000 on it. They're like, well, maybe you should list or make an offer with someone else.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because I have the other side of the coin, obviously being a broker. The first thing is probably most realtors they don't want to spend time on something potentially that is going to end up, they're going to put effort into writing up a contract, showing you the house, actually the opposite order. And then, putting potentially trying to put that together. And, when you come on a $150,000 listing offering, 60, their initial thought is like, oh, no way, that's not going to work. And then they pass you off to somebody else. But the other side of it is, for the listeners and for your knowledge, I mean, technically we're required by law as a licensed broker. If you want to submit an offer, regardless of how ridiculous that offer is, we have to submit it. And it has to be presented to the seller, and the listing broker has to, at least entertain the possibility, regardless of how low it is. He or she can't come back and say, no way, we're not going to present this. That would be a violation of license law. So it's kind of both sides of the coin there. You just got to find the right broker to work with. And I know you and I offered on a property a couple weeks back, and I told you right away, I'm like, yeah, man, this thing's multiple offer. The way the market is in our area, the property you're looking at, which we didn't even have to go see at that point. I think your numbers just came from, your general estimations and whatnot. I had a pretty strong feeling that it wasn't going to work out, and ultimately it didn't, but I still submitted the offer.
Right.
So find the right people to work with, I think, is the answer. But go on.
Correct. Well, where are we at?
We're at...
What's the next question?
What I asked you is how you do your valuations, and you talked about potentially working with brokers and how you don't really have somebody specifically.
Okay. Now I calculate all my ARVs on my own, and I mostly use Zillow, because on Zillow or any site you use, Trulia or whatever else, sold properties are sold properties. Those numbers are the same even on the MLS and that. So I could do it like a 6-month search, kind of gauge the area. Most of the time they have pictures of, the inside of the house, so you can kind of gauge the finishes and, square footage and everything else. So I get a ballpark.
Sure.
So I ballpark it because I throw offers out there. You got to keep trying, keep making offers. It's just like doing sales. It's like a numbers game. Find your number, make an offer. If it doesn't work, move on to the next one.
Right.
And the more you do, the better chances you have of getting a deal. So I'll look at a property if someone will call me, or if I'll see it and, it makes sense just looking at it. If there's no pictures, I'll get into there and I'll do my repair estimate, and then I'll make an offer. But most of the time I do a desktop analysis. You can mostly tell like what needs updating and stuff from what you're looking at on with the pictures. So that's how I gauge my numbers.
Cool. No, I appreciate that. All right, so you got this deal under contract. You end up closing in March, I assume, because that's what the seller wanted.
The seller wanted to move March 6th, and we had a contract signed in October because they needed it to present to the authorities in Canada, like, hey, we're moving, we're going to sell our property. And the seller, I said, we could sign the contract in January or February before you move. They said, I'd rather sign a contract now.
Right.
I'll be right there.
Lock it up. Yep.
Yeah, I'm on my way. We could sign this right now, and hey, I'm your guy.
Sure.
So we signed the contract, and I put in their stipulations like, it has to be in the condition it is right now. I'm going to come back out mid to late January and reevaluate the house to make sure everything's in order, and then we can move forward. So we went through the holidays, enjoy it, don't worry about anything, and then mid-January I went back out there, and everything was still good, so we moved forward.
Cool.
So I didn't have the financing for this property, and I made the offer, and I wanted to rehab it. And in my contracts, it's conditioned upon getting financing. So when my side fell through, I suggested a subject to deal with the seller.
Awesome.
And at this time, we built rapport. They trusted me, and we were very kind of open. I've been over there a couple times at this point, so we know each other. And when I explain things like a subject to, I'll tell you the worst stuff right up front. Hey, this is the idea of a subject to. You can get closed upon by your mortgage lender. They can lock it up, and then we'd have to deal with maybe a court process, or they can call the note due, and I'd have to buy it, or something would have to happen along those lines. Explain what a subject to is, because you're kind of going onto the backside of it. But what is a subject to for somebody who doesn't know? So subject to is taking over a property with the existing mortgage in place. So they would leave, we'd sign some paperwork, and then you would take it over and you would make the mortgage payments. That's pretty much cut and dry.
Perfect.
Of it. But there's clauses in mortgages and where you're not allowed to sell your house without it being paid off. Like someone can't come in and take it over.
Right.
So in some mortgages, that's a clause. It's not illegal to do, but it's frowned upon.
The bank doesn't like it. That's all. It's not illegal, but the bank doesn't like it. Yes. Sure. Totally.
Right. So a lot of subject twos are done every year. They're not frequent, but they are done. Are you there, Joe?
I'm here, man.
Okay. I'm on a Bluetooth that said recharge, so I don't know if it dropped you or not.
Nope.
So, most of the time these subject twos are fine, the majority of the time I shall say, but the banks could call the note due if they find out what's going on. Why they don't do that is because if you're making the mortgage payment and the mortgage is getting paid, most of the time the bank doesn't care because they're still getting their money. So the seller couldn't find an attorney that was comfortable doing subject to, and from every attorney I talked to since then, that's most likely going to be your case because they're representing you and they don't want to be left holding the bag if something bad happens.
Right.
Because they know about this and they don't want to put themselves at risk, and it makes perfect sense. So I don't fault them, but it's part of the process. So the seller was not comfortable with subject to after talking to their attorney. So I tried to wholesale the property, and I brought about 10 investors through, and from the location, because it was very close to a highway, that for the numbers, people just didn't see value in it. So I ended up taking a partner and on the property. So now I was going to rehab it.
Okay.
So the process is, I still wanted a subject to, couldn't do that. I went to the TANF group, accountability group, kind of with this in mind. And that night, Chris Emerald happened to be there, and he's a local attorney who knows the stuff. And me and him got to talking, and there's something called Articles of Agreement for Deed.
Right.
Which is very similar to a subject to. And we ended up going that route. So to explain it, I just say it's similar to a subject to, except I found an attorney that would work with the seller on their side.
Sure.
So the attorney was comfortable, talked to the seller, they were comfortable with it, and we moved forward.
That's great.
Let's say we move forward the Friday before the Monday that they were leaving to Canada. So you can imagine how kind of stressful things were.
I bet.
Them moving on Monday, still kind of don't know how their deal is going to go, but trusting me that I was doing right by them.
Sure. No, that's awesome. So Articles of Agreement for Deed are basically like an installment contract, just to simplify it for the listener. That's, the Articles of Agreement are basically saying you are going to end up with a deed to the property upon payoff of whatever that agreed price is, whether it's payoff of the loan plus profit for the seller, whatever. I mean, it's an installment contract, and it actually has better implications when you're an investor selling or even a regular individual, depending on how you've owned the property. As far as taxation and whatnot, of taking your gain over a period of time as opposed to an initial sale. But we don't want to. We could make a whole other podcast about that. So you got the Articles of Agreement for Deed set up. They actually were probably under the gun a little bit, but they trusted you based on the rapport you'd built, which I think is awesome. Got the attorneys.
And
attorneys to agree.
We had rough conversations. So me and the seller, like reality conversations. Hey, like we're moving Monday. They said whether or not we sell this, they kind of like we can just list it, when we leave. And I was like, well, I'm talking with an attorney, and let me work this out. And turns out that they had a son staying behind. He's living in the area, and he's over 21. So what we did was with their attorney, they signed over power of attorney to their son. So the paperwork got done the next week, but they were already gone. But when it needed to be signed, he was local, and he was able to come in and fulfill their side of the contract.
Cool.
So, yeah, that's a little cut and dry of it. So
Sure.
we're into it now. We're pretty much finishing it up. I tiled 3 bathrooms last week, and this week we're kind of finishing them out. So we sanded and refinished the floors. We matched some hardwood where there was tile, so now the whole first floor is hardwood. We did painting. We had the cabinets refinished, and then it's just a lot of little stuff, changing hardwares, painting doors, new closets, stuff like that.
Cool.
So we're going to hopefully have it listed in a week and a half, and
make some money.
Make some money.
So what was your numbers
right.
on that one? Like, I know that's, I think, what I started the initial question with back 10 minutes ago, but with the articles of agreement for deed and everything, did you maintain the same purchase price, or did that change? I mean, give me a little bit of the broad view of how the numbers worked out, or
so
will work out.
The price was the same.
Okay.
Price was the same. We ended up getting the property subject to for about $265,000.
Great. Okay.
And our budget $30,000 to $35,000 for holding costs and repairs. It started off at about $15,000 to $20,000, but after talking with my partner, we both agreed that doing some more updates would benefit the end cost.
Sure.
Or the end price. So
you're in it for about 3. I'm doing some quick numbers. 265, 35 in holding costs and repairs. So you're in it for about 300,000 total. I mean, what are you going to list this thing for? Approximately
300,000 total. I initially got under contract thinking I would put it out at 365.
Wow.
And then maybe sell it for 350, 340.
Sure.
Because we're going to market it as, hey, we're motivated, make an offer.
Right. Yeah.
And
get rid of it. Yeah.
I'd rather sell it with 5,000 or 10,000 less now than wait a couple months for a better price.
Sure.
So that's kind of our exit strategy. We're going to actually list it now close to 400,000.
Wow. That's great.
Just because the market, it's turning into a buyer's market, and a house very similar.
Seller's market.
Seller's market, sorry. Seller's market.
Right.
And a house that's very comparable sold for about $300,000 within the last month, and you walk into it and this place is like the 70s. Neon green kitchen, probably appliances from the same era, wallpaper from floor to ceiling.
Wow.
Outdated everything. Sold for $300,000. So we're refinishing everything. Everything's modern, up to date. So that's where we're plugging this at.
Cool. No, that's great. So let's talk about the partnership a little bit. Is that somebody you met at a meetup, or is this one of your previous relationships? I mean, are you splitting 50-50? How's that side of it work?
Okay. So I was looking to wholesale this property. I reached out to a couple networks, and I actually met my partner's wife at a Fortune Builders meeting in Chicago last year.
Cool.
So they came out, looked at the property. The numbers didn't make sense for them, but we kept in contact. So I was then looking for private money. So I got a couple different avenues. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take this on myself. I'm looking for the $30,000 to repair and hold this. So me and my partner talked more, and he was like, I can't buy the property. I'm not in the position to. I see the value in it. But what I could do is I could fund the rehab and the closing costs.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a new investor. They've never done a property before.
Okay.
And we kind of have the same training background, so that builds a little rapport right there.
Sure.
And then I thought about that as I'm reaching out to private money, and I'm like, well, that's kind of a good deal. He's not going to take any percentage on the money, but we're going to split the deal 50-50.
Oh, that's a great deal for him. You're doing all the work?
Great deal for him. So, well, I'm pretty much like the GC.
Okay.
So he's coming in, he's taking care of the finances, the holding costs, he's scheduling contractors that we hired jobs for, and he's kind of managing that side.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, and it works out. So the days I can't be here, he can be there. And in all reality, I am enjoying this process more than my last flip because it's not just on me.
Right.
We're sharing the weight, we're sharing the responsibility, and it's a win-win.
Brainstorming
ideas. So he's getting the knowledge of a flip, right?
Yep.
Brainstorming ideas. Him and his wife get firsthand, like, hey, this is your first deal too. So this is my second, their first. I come with a different set of skills than they do, so we're kind of meshing, and I'm learning from them just like they're learning from me. So it's pretty exciting.
I think an important thing to bring up is something I've said before, and you've probably heard, and I'm guessing the listeners have too, which is you find the deal. You can find the money, and that might be too broad of a statement, but you find the right deal, you'll be able to find how you can exit that property correctly if it is purchased at the right price and you've got the right margins to be made on it. And as a newer investor yourself, having the right networks of people, obviously you were able to be successful in this deal just by who you knew, and were able to connect with the right people to do that. I think that's great. Partnerships in general. We recently talked about that in one of the podcasts with Josh Brown, which was episode number 40. And he kind of had, some good and bad experiences on the partnership side. But I'll say just from my own, personal experience, I didn't really get into partnerships until the last few years. And you brought up something interesting, which was, carrying some of the weight. It actually creates a much more enjoyable situation, I feel like you have a lot more fun investing in real estate,
right,
doing these projects, because you're working with someone else, gives you someone to bounce your frustrations off of, should we do this? Should we do that? Oh crap, we got this problem. Maybe there's a better way to deal with it. Maybe that person knows somebody that can help alleviate that problem. And at the end of the day, you just laugh a lot more when, stupid things happen or go the right way or the wrong way. So I would recommend for anybody who's just like what you did, man. I mean, that's something to be very proud of. I mean, if you have the desire to get out there and be an investor, yet you might not have the financial means, that doesn't mean you can't get deals done. You just have to do exactly what Chad's done and, really start marketing yourself at networking groups and make some connections, maybe attend some of these meetings or join some type of a organization like you did through Fortune Builders. I personally have no experience with them, and you're the only person I know that actually has done anything with them, but that's awesome that you're succeeding as a result. So that's incredible.
There's a couple people that go to the Tuesday group that are Fortune Builders also.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know that.
We don't really advertise it.
No, and I think that's great. I mean, I can understand why you wouldn't do that. I mean, because it's not really the forum to do it in, but I mean, if it's working for you, I have no problem with you, saying that's what you've done and how you got started. I think that's great. I mean, everyone's got to start somehow, and if that's the fact you're successful as a result is really positive. So I have a couple more questions for you, so we can start wrapping it up, because I think we're we're over. We've extended we extended over like the hour mark, which I promised myself I won't do anymore. Not because I don't. I mean, I love it. I love all this great information, but at some point people are listening. And 45 minutes in, they're like, let's change to let's change back
Wrap
to
it up.
The rock and roll. So, I mean, what type of advice would you give out to an investor who's just getting started? It sounds like we just covered that, but we talked about networking, partnering. I mean, anything else you can add to that as someone who's been through the trenches as a new investor, basically starting off with, very little to get going.
Right. Okay. And I've told this to a couple newer investors. Some people have sought me out and bought me breakfast just to kind of pick my brain because they're new. And sure. I'm just open, so if anyone wants to contact me, contact Joe and get my information. I'm more than happy to talk about anything you want.
Sure.
But as a new investor, I tell people, because with this company I invested in, they show you how to build a whole real estate empire, pretty much. But the main focus is pick a lane, pick a marketing and be consistent. So whether you're doing bandit signs or mailers or networking or anything like that, just stay consistent and you'll see results. Like, I cast a wide net early on. I probably did 10 or 15 marketing things at a time, but I wasn't consistent. I got lucky and found a lead or two, but
sure.
I realized that, hey, I need to, pick something, stick to it, and then maybe add as I go. So my new marketing strategy for this year is I'm picking an avenue or two, and I'm just going to kind of ride that, grind that out,
Focus, yeah.
Focus on it, and hopefully add to it as I go, bring in more deals.
Awesome.
So.
No, that's perfect. I 100% agree. You're right. Change, take everything you're doing on that wide net, bring it down into 1 or 2 lanes of traffic so you can really focus on those and be very good at that so you can be successful. It makes total sense.
And as you go.
Exactly. What any recommendations for books or anything that the listener could take away from this that they can maybe grab off Amazon, white paper, YouTube video? What can you say to somebody who needs to learn more about how to do this?
Well, I guess it's where you want to learn. I'm reading so many books. Like I got the Tools of Titans from Tim Ferriss, which is interesting because it just kind of interviews. Yeah, it's fantastic. But
yeah,
I mean, Brian, if you're looking for motivation and kind of you got excuses or whatever else, Brian Tracy is like solid. Like I'm looking at a book right now, No Excuses or Time Management, and there's that. I'm reading a sales book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and that's very interesting for negotiations, as I feel I'll be doing more negotiating this year. So I'm kind of prepping myself for that.
Cool.
Mindset by Carol Dweck. And I think the most important thing is whatever books you want to get into, to get your mindset right. Like everyone has excuses or everything can kind of clog up where you should be focusing on. So if you have an interest, get a book for that. If you're looking for real estate books, there's plenty out there, and motivational books and anything else, but just find something to help you get to your goal, whether you're, having issues focusing or anything else. There's books for that, so.
Awesome.
I can get into details about them, but I don't want to ramble on.
No, it's all good, man. No, I think you gave some great examples. I just got that Tools of Titans book by Tim Ferriss as well. It's actually interesting because that's actually the whatchamacallit. He basically took his podcast interviews and then put them down in paper, right? And that's what that book is comprised of, is all of his podcasts, the people he's interviewed. But some people are, they learn by listening. Some people, are better readers. I actually like that book because it's so separated between the different types of guests that are on there, and you can just kind of pick a chapter and run with it. Instead of, it's not one of those books that I would think you would read cover to cover, but it's possible.
No,
but it's cool.
What I do with that is, whether I'm working on my rehab or working from home, like I'll take 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just read a little snippet, because it has 3 sections: health, wealth, and wisdom.
Sure.
And he just kind of interviews people in those categories. So I just, whatever I'm feeling that day, I'll just pick someone out, read their 2 or 3 page interview, and kind of think about that as I go on with my day.
Absolutely. No, I love it. I think that's great. It's a great primer to start a day. I was actually doing the same thing, so that's very interesting. I said, you're a lot like me in a lot of ways. That's pretty cool. You mentioned about getting in contact with you. I'm more than happy to put your information out there unless you'd prefer not to. So now would be the time.
Oh, yeah. I don't care. My email is Chad, CHAD, at BC Property Solutions. So it's Bravo Charlie, property with a Y, solutions with an S, .net.
Cool.
And then, if you want to email me there, if you got my phone number or anything, call Joe. I won't blast on the podcast.
All right. No, good idea. All right, man. I appreciate you taking the time today. It was a great podcast, a lot of great information. I'm hoping I'm hoping to see you again at the next meetup, and we'll talk a little bit more about what you've been doing. I'm really curious to hear how this Northbrook deal works out that you got subject to articles of agreement for deed. A lot of different pieces to make that come together, but I think that's pretty neat. So maybe we'll do a follow up on. We'll do a podcast, like a quick 10 or 15 minute deal on how it all worked out in the end, because I'm thinking you're going to be pretty successful with that flip. That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'll make kind of a cheat sheet on it when it all finishes up. So
yeah, we'll present it.
Pass it along at a meeting, and we can talk about it and see how it worked out. That's
awesome. All right, man. Well, you have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you next week at the meetup.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investorempowermentchicago.com or tennisgrouprealty.com.